Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively getting out on the trail of the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I'll be giving away the Ravens scratch-offs. We gave a whole bunch of them away up at Hollywood Casino on Sunday. We had a great party up there. Happy ending. At least that much in the only game of the morning. We'll be getting back up to Hollywood Casino doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by Window Nation. I am not a certified master installer, but my shirt says so. Windows, sidings, and doors. 866-90Nation. You buy two, you get two free. 0% financing here in October. And our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare. I got to get my oil change. My little light came on Friday. It's about that time. I'll get out there this week. I was waiting for my birthday to come and go and my big Drug City event. If you hear Luke chatting with my old science teacher, George Schulin, here this week, or hear my son on the air with Chuck Jacobs talking about proper old fashions with butterscotch, which I enjoyed on Friday night with Gina Schock down at the fountain. Check that out all week long. Luke is going to be checking out practice. We're talking practice. They're coming back home this week while we're watching the Philadelphia Phillies and the Houston Astros and the Texas Rangers and the Arizona Diamondbacks play baseball. We'll get some baseball in here, but we're going to stick with football right now as the Ravens get back from London. Luke will be on the backfields. And, look, we've talked a lot about the win and the backup quarterback and the time change and the Lions and all that. Let's talk about the offense in the goal line and the problems they're really having down on the goal line, because it's not supposed to be this way. I mean, when they drafted Lamar, I always talk about that game we saw, and the internet loves when I talk about the Canton game where he's running into linebackers, and it freaked me out 5 years ago. But I think the one thing we saw at that point was, man, in space, nobody's going to be able to stop this kid. They get down on the goal line and the 3-yard line, they're going to spread it out, and nobody's going to be able to catch him. That hasn't really been the case. I mean, I think we believed in the beginning that would be the ultimate is down on the goal line, that this would be an unstoppable offense down there. It turns out that the spaces really tightens things up and makes their offense operate differently. And it hasn't been good. And I know Monken's going to go into the laboratory here this week. They all are, offensive line, and saying, how can we be this ineffective at the goal line?
Well, we need to be transparent here. They were third in the NFL in red zone offense going into this week. The red zone offense was excellent the first 4 weeks of the season. Now, the last 2 weeks, it has certainly taken a turn in the not so positive direction. And clearly on Sunday, when you go 1 for 5, officially 1 for 6, really 1 for 5. Again, Justin Tucker kicking a field goal with 1 second to go inside the red zone.
That's not a drive.
That's not a true 0 for 1 for the offense. So let's be fair in that regard. But it needs to be better. There's no question about it. And I think for me, what's concerning about this offense, or maybe not concerning is the right word, I think frustrating, Nestor, is it kind of feels like there's just something new that it's like a new leak springs every week, right? I mean, it was the drops big time in Pittsburgh. They didn't have any Sunday against Tennessee in London. They really didn't have any issues with drops prior to the Week 5 loss to Pittsburgh. So, now it's the red zone. It was injuries to the offensive line a few weeks back and what they were dealing with there. It feels like every time they get something, I don't know if solved is the right word, but at least it's not your major flaw, then something else is popping up. It's just been very choppy in that way. And for an offense to be great, you need to clean those things up. And really for me, what the issue was inside the red zone, we can point to Todd Monken's play calling if we want. I definitely think there have been some times where he's lacked some feel for game situation, for what's working. Those first 3 drives on Sunday, they were throwing the ball really, really well. What bogged them down was their running game. It really was. I mean, Lamar was in a pretty darn good rhythm early in that game, throwing the football. They got inside the red zone, or they got inside the 25-yard line, in that first drive. And it just, the running game really bogged them down, not being able to blow people off the ball, not being able to move people at the line of scrimmage. I think the pass protection was good enough on Sunday, but they didn't move people between the tackles. I mean, look at Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, their final numbers running the football. I mean, it was right around 3 yards per carry between the two of them combined. That's not what you're looking for. I looked at this, looking at the entire game log, Nestor. when the Ravens had a situation where they had 4 yards to go or less, that was always a running situation under Greg Roman, right? So I'm not even saying short yardage. I mean, that's still relatively short yardage if we're going to include 4 yards to go. But they ran the ball a total of 15 times when they had 4 yards to go or less, and they only converted 7 of those. That's not great, especially for a team that takes such pride in running the football. That's not anything to write home about. So for me, I mean, it really was their between the tackles running game that left a lot to be desired. Now, I want to point out Tennessee does not have a bad run defense whatsoever. That's not a terrible defense overall. So you keep that in mind. But if there's something I'd point to with this offensive line, beyond the injuries, beyond whatever lingering health concerns, Ronnie Stanley might have, or Morgan Moses coming back from the shoulder, Tyler Linderbaum with the ankle, they didn't dominate at the line of scrimmage the way that you'd like to see a team do that in running the football, especially when you get inside the 20s. So, it's something that has to be better. They have to execute better. I think Todd Monken at times is not necessarily called the most imaginative plays, and that's going to happen as well. Coaches go through periods of time where they're trying to feel things out and see what their team does best and trying to pick the right play in the right situation at the right time in the football game. That's not easy to do. I've never been a play caller, so I want to be clear about that. Not expecting perfection from Todd Monken or this offense, but it absolutely has to be more consistent. And a lot of people, I find some irony in the fact that some of those situations where the Ravens kicked on Sunday were times where John Harbaugh and Greg Roman would have gone for it in the
Well,
past.
that's when the whole philosophy's changed,
Yeah.
right? Like literally,
Yeah.
we saw that at the beginning of the game, and 4th and inches is a go always from anywhere on the field. And all of a sudden, inside the 5-yard line, it's bring on Tucker. Let's take 3.
Well,
that's a philosophical change from week to week, and maybe that's a London. We got to get playing. John played the game differently on Sunday. Thought about the game differently than we've seen him. I mean, and I don't know.
Yeah.
You got the press pass. I don't. You ask him about it, and he'll say, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about." Like playing dumb. That's the hard. I don't miss that part of these press conferences at all. John Harbaugh lying to me and me spending the day to go out there to do it. I'm not doing that. But something changed about the way they thought about the game on Sunday and the way they thought about the outcome on Sunday, because they played the game differently.
Well, and that's where you do have to acknowledge it is different week to week. You are playing different opponents week to week. Are you going to do that against the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buffalo Bills, or certainly this year the Miami Dolphins, the way that they score points? No, you're going to have to score touchdowns, because even the Ravens defense, as good as it is, not going to hold those teams down entirely. So I do think there is something to the idea that you're in London, you're going up against a Titans team that entered what week they entered the week. I think they were 26th in the NFL in points per game. It was a team that certainly was struggling to sustain drives, until the Ravens started giving them yardage with penalties in that third quarter. So you
kick the first field goal not thinking there's going to be 6 of them, right? You kick the first one and say,
sure,
next time then the next time, and then the next time, and then and all of a sudden you're like, this is the 4th time we're calling on Tucker. What are we doing down here? Then it becomes something we talk about on Monday morning, because I don't think they go into the game thinking they're going to kick field goals inside the red zone. They think they're going to punch the ball in, but something about the confidence level on 4th down says we better kick the ball.
Well, and again, it goes back to your offensive line not necessarily moving people at the line of scrimmage and winning at the line of scrimmage the way that they're accustomed to doing, or at least accustomed to doing under Greg Roman and what their offense was before making this change. And I'm not singularly blaming Todd Monken. There are always different variables at work there. All these offensive linemen are also a year older. Other than Linderbaum, you're talking about a veteran group there. So you're talking about that factor as well. But I will say this. If you told John Harbaugh privately, if you told this football team privately, the coaching staff specifically, players are always going to want to go for it. Players always want to score touchdowns. But if you're looking at this pragmatically, if you say on Saturday night, you're going to be in position for Justin Tucker to kick 6 field goals, and they're not going to be, we're not talking 53-yarders here. We're talking about more of the chip shot variety for Justin Tucker. They would probably tell you, you know what? As long as we score a touchdown with those 6 field goals at some point along the way, that's probably going to be good enough to beat the Tennessee Titans based on where they are right now with Tannehill, where they are with their offensive line, where they are with, the fact that their first round wide receiver from a year ago was hurt and not playing. They have DeAndre Hopkins, but not a whole lot else in terms of pass catchers
And by
that
the way,
scare
how you
you.
feel that your defense, I don't think
Well,
it's lost on Harbaugh that the defense is better than the offense. I
well,
don't
and
think
that's
I
and that's right, and that's my point about them going up against Tennessee. So, look, that's not to say you go into it saying we want to kick field goals. But if you're having some issues with your execution, if you're not running the ball between the tackles the way that you would like, you are a little more apt to take 3 in those situations compared to this Sunday against the Detroit Lions, let's say, who, I'm not saying they're the greatest show on turf, but they've scored some points, and Jared Goff's throwing the football effectively this year, and they've got some really talented wide receivers, and including the kid, their first round pick from a year ago who began the year suspended with gambling. He made a big play, and he adds to that group. So little different story potentially this coming Sunday, where you're talking about some of those red zone scenarios where you might need to go for it on short yardage because you might need a couple more touchdowns than just settling for Justin Tucker field goals. So it's always different. There's always a different opponent, where you are health wise, where you are personnel wise. All of those factors are different week to week. Yes, no one's going to sit there and say they're happy about going 1 for 5, officially 1 for 6 inside the red zone. But at the same time, was it good enough against the opponent they played in London on Sunday? Yeah, it was. So got to get better. There's no doubt about that. They've got to run the football more effectively between the tackles because you don't want to put it all on Lamar Jackson. And they've got to execute. And Todd Monken's got to have the right feel for what's working best. And when you have that feel, stick with it. There have been some times this year where, I think he's lacked a little bit of feel. And I think part of that is we're all asking this question: what is the identity of this offense beyond Lamar putting on the cape? And there are certainly instances and times where that is what you want to do, and that's fine. But you don't want to have to do that for 60 minutes, for an entire 60 minutes. You don't want to have to do that every single week, every single drive, every single quarter. So I think there is some question about this offense in terms of what their identity is, what their optimal identity is going to be. And, again, it's looked good for stretches. I still go back to that Cincinnati game and how effectively they ran a quick game against the Bengals defense, with a banged up offensive line and some injuries. And, they operated that very well. And they won a football game on the road against, the team that's been the division champion the last couple of years. But those periods of time where it's looked very high level, that's been fleeting. And we've seen choppiness, and collectively, we've seen them have issues finishing football games and finishing drives recently, the last 2 weeks with the red zone specifically. So they've got to get better. There's no doubt about that. But again, I will go back to, if Saturday night you tell John Harbaugh you're going to kick 6 field goals, he's going to say, we need to get better in the red zone. But if we score a touchdown with those 6 field goals, which they did, that's probably going to be enough against the Titans and their offense, knowing how good our defense is. So you're always making those decisions. And this is coming from the analytics football nerd guy, right? I read that stuff, and I know how many times coaches should go for it rather than kick in terms of looking at win probability and models and all that different stuff. But all of that into account, you're still evaluating and making decisions based on who your opponent is, based on the health of your O-line and how well you're running the ball and things of that nature. And, you had a group that was struggling to move people consistently in the running game on Sunday. So, I think for me, it's what worked to win Sunday's game against the Titans in London after a long week away from home, third straight road game. But of course, it has to get better. You cannot be in a position where you're in goal to go the way they were a couple times and having to settle for 3. If you do that, especially when you start playing better teams, that's a recipe for getting beat.
Luke Jones joining us here. He'll be in Owings Mills all week long. We'll still be watching some baseball, talking a little baseball around here as well. If you hear Luke and I chatting from Drug City, he also was our guest on the Crab Cake Tour last week at the fountain at Drug City for my 55th birthday. Double nickels out there. Somebody compared me to Terrell Suggs. I did not like that. Although he will be entering the Ring of Honor apparently this week, right? This is his week, right? Or
This
my
is
nuts?
his week.
This is
Yeah.
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 I had that in my calendar that this is homecoming week, right?
Yeah, homecoming week against a not so homecoming opponent, and even back in May, I mean, we saw what the Lions were the second half of last year. I think the potential was certainly there on paper for them to take the next step, but in the same way we talk about the Browns or any number, the Bengals 25 years ago, you until they do it, they're still the Lions, right? Well, you look at their record right now and you say that looks like a pretty darn good football team. Now we'll see where they are come November and December and January if they're in the tournament. But this is going to be this is not a homecoming game, in the way that you traditionally think about it. So Ravens have to get themselves reacclimated to the East Coast and being home again and being on Eastern time. And the Lions themselves, they're coming off of a road win at Tampa, and they've looked pretty good. So this is like we said in our previous conversation, it's gonna be a nice litmus test, I think, for both these teams going up against, I think, what everyone would perceive as quality opponents, whether they're pretty good, or great. Time will tell for either of these teams. But 4-2 against a team that's lost one game. That's it's a pretty good test for John Harbaugh's team, especially coming home from London with that long plane ride home.
You were among the people that were looking to run Greg Roman out, that his time was up and we needed fresh this and thoughts that. And they freshened up the wide receiver room with Odell Beckham, gave him a lot of money, brought him in. I haven't felt that impact or seen that impact, certainly not on the field for what they paid him. I think we all could have predicted that the day they paid him. Most people believe that was some sort of come on to get Lamar signed. Who knows? I mean, I don't talk to these kids anymore. And even if I do, when I see you talk to them, I don't feel like we're getting any truth out of any of this. The truth comes on Sunday when they play call, right? And in regard to Monken and the whole offensive thought of send Tucker in, we'll kick a field goal, but we can go 60 yards down the field. I call it dink and dunk. That's silly to call it dink and dunk, but it's a little bit of what it is because they don't go down the field much or well. And protecting Lamar for Mississippi 3, Mississippi 4, Mississippi 5, get Lamar out of the pocket. At that point, Lamar might as well run. Might as well not pass at that point. Because if he gets out of the pocket, to your point, it's the best play they have, which is him running for 14 yards or maybe 45 yards or maybe just 8 yards because the first guy gets an angle on him and forces him down. I saw Lamar hook slide on Sunday. I see Lamar playing differently. I see them playing differently with Lamar than maybe or wanting to. I see that Monken did all of his homework. We want to do things differently. Game on the line, spread him out, let Lamar run in the third quarter, fourth quarter to get a first down because we need the ball and it's a 6-point game or 10-point game, whatever it is. We got to keep the ball. Lamar running, still their best play. What's their second best play? It used to be Mark Andrews, and it feels like teams want to take that away. And then it used to be, well, J.K. Dobbins, that'll be it. Well, he's gone. And Zay Flowers, they only get him the ball so much. Bateman, who I know you've been down on, played, but he was a part of the interception play that you could say that's Lamar's interception, but I didn't see any battle. I didn't see any comeback. I don't know where he's supposed to be in regard to stopping and turning and getting the ball. I'm not impressed with the offense, and I don't want to say I'm unimpressed with Monken, but I don't know where Monken's confidence level is with this group because it feels to me like the offensive line, as much as we thought they're veteran, they're good. If we get a Zeitler and a Moses and a Stanley and a Linderbaum out there, we'll figure out Simpson and he got hurt. We'll be better in week 7, week 8, week 9. Well, we're here now. We're getting there. And I don't know, man. The Greg Roman out with Roman and in with Monken, I don't want to say that I don't see huge differences. I think it's different. I don't see the productivity being any better. And certainly, I don't see this revolution that John Harbaugh talked about 5 years ago. The revolution's over. The war's over. They've stopped that. This Lamar's going to run left. Lamar's going to run right. We're going to run Lamar 16 times a game for 138 yards. He's going to get your ass once for 60 yards at least. That's good. That feels like that's gone away in the same way that by the 5th year for Cam Newton, for Steve McNair, for Steve Young, for any of these quarterbacks who think they're going to run, and that's going to be what they do, and you're going to pay them to do that. I don't know. I've questioned this Lamar contract from the beginning. I'll continue to question it, but at some point, throwing the football and throwing it successfully, not 21 to 30 and dink and dunk, and we're holding on for dear lives and we're kicking field goals and we're not good in the red zone. I'm talking about the whole offense and being something where we're 6 weeks in and saying, what are they good at besides giving Lamar the ball and spreading out the world and having him take angles where they miss? The Flowers thing's promising. The Andrews thing, I don't know about his health from the offseason and what we're getting and his ability to get open and their ability to scheme him open and take advantage of the things they were the first couple of years that really work for Lamar to Mark Andrews. I mean, so we start to see that 6-8 times a game again, I'll feel better about the offense. And especially against bad teams. I'm perplexed at the offense and why. And I did predict this back at Labor Day. I said, you watch all this talk about the offense. The defense will be the stronger side of the ball. It is. And I'm waiting for that not to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with everything you just said, but the big picture, yeah, I mean, look, I have it right in front of me. Their rankings before Sunday. I'll just go through it. Total offense, 13th. Rushing offense in terms of yards per game. And again, I like per attempt. I like rates rather than volume, but 4th in the NFL in rushing offense. Passing offense, volume-wise, 26. That sounds very Greg Roman-like. I can't disagree with you, at least on that front. Points per game, tied for 17th. They were 21.8 before they scored 24 on Sunday. Third down, they've been really good. They were 8th in the league in third down. They were 50% on Sunday. So they've been good on third down. Red zone, as I said to you, they were excellent in the red zone through the first 5 weeks of the season. Now, what has gone away in the red zone specifically, and then I'll get to your bigger picture question, because it certainly has merit what you just laid out, at least part of it, I would say anyway. But
part of my stuff usually does have merit.
Well, hey, we disagree. That's fine. What we're talking about is subjective at the end of the day. But at the same time, what worked so well in the red zone the first few weeks of the season was they were, at those points, they weren't necessarily laying out a ton of designed runs for Lamar Jackson over the course of 60 minutes. But inside the red area, that's where we were seeing some of those design runs for Lamar that worked really well. And it feels like they've gotten away from that a little bit the last couple of weeks, and they haven't had as much success there. So anyone will tell you, I mean, and Todd Monken laid this out. He laid out what's most important for an offense, and it wasn't even his specific philosophy. It's what any offensive coordinator would tell you. And red zone offense is up there, right? You get inside the red area where things are a little more condensed, a little more compressed, a little more crowded. You have to be able to score touchdowns. And again, they did an outstanding job doing that. Through their first 4 games, they were 80%, best in the NFL in that regard. But the last couple of weeks, it has gone sideways. Now, people will say, well, they went up against Pittsburgh, who isn't the steel curtain of a great Steelers defense, but it is still a Steelers defense and capable. And then they went up against Tennessee, whose defense isn't great overall, but they were 4th in the NFL in red zone defense going into Sunday's game. So they're a defense that plays well inside the 20s. So, they've got to figure it out there. I think that's where the play calling at times has been choppy. But your overall question about this offense and what they do best, I'll disagree with you on one thing. You made mention that they don't throw the ball downfield particularly well. The numbers actually suggest that they've been pretty good doing that. The issue has been they haven't done it enough, or they haven't gotten the proper pass protection to do it enough. Lamar's actually been quite good throwing the ball downfield, pushing it downfield. They haven't done it a whole lot. That would be an argument to do that a little bit more, but you need the proper pass protection, and you've got to have the right flow, game plan and all those different
things. I would
things.
also say, and go back and check this out, on plays when they want to go down the field, Lamar, drop, 2-step, 3-step, 4-step, 5. Okay, They want to go down the field. Now, what happens when that happens?
Sure.
It's either a check down or Lamar escapes and runs, or Lamar gets sacked or trapped,
Mhm.
or it's an incomplete pass, right? And they don't have a lot of incompletes. I mean, against all of it, I mean, the efficiency is part of what they do. But how many times they go into the huddle and say, "All right, we're going to have an 8+ on this play. We're going to, this is going to be a real pass, not a dink pass. We're going to try to get a first down on this play, first and whatever, second and whatever. We're going to throw the ball, not a check down." They try that play a lot. Like they call that play in the huddle, and then how it turns out, to your point, you say they don't throw the ball down the field that much. They're efficient when they do. Lamar's not just winging it a whole lot. I see these backup quarterbacks just throw the ball and pray.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Lamar doesn't do that. Lamar will hold it, eat it, run it, try to make something out of it, extend the play, then maybe dirt the ball. But Lamar's not a chuck and duck guy, which is part of the beauty of him, is that he really does take very good care of the football. I mean, despite the problems you've had this year with fumbles and stuff like that,
Fumbles, right?
that has been my biggest issue over the 6 years with him. If I look back at the best part of Lamar Jackson, he takes pretty good care of the football. I mean, by and large, forget the speed and the passing and all the question marks about his eliteness and all of that. I do think he takes care of the ball and doesn't throw the ball around much, despite the interception that Bateman got involved in. So them going down the field, part of that is that they don't take that big pop because they have another option. A lot of other quarterbacks don't have the option to run around, extend the play, maybe make something happen. He has the legs to do that, and I think that takes away from their long passing game, because once the play breaks down, he's not looking down the field anymore. He's looking at what's in front of him, and he has a skill set that 80% of the other quarterbacks don't have.
Yeah, I mean, I'll disagree in the sense that I think he does look downfield a lot, but there are plenty of times where he's going to take off, right? Rather than someone like Patrick Mahomes, who will move around, but generally his goal is not going to be to take off, right? Lamar, and we've seen it the last couple of weeks. He's made some beautiful throws where he's extended plays and ran around, moved to his left, moved to his right, and makes a throw where you just say, wow. I mean, look at the touchdown to Zay Flowers. He rolled to his left, and it wasn't this an extraordinary tight window throw, but the movement where you had him moving one direction and then Zay Flowers cuts back towards the middle of the field and hits him in stride. It wasn't a difficult completion to make, but just the stress those two put on the defense in that case. I mean, that's where you see the potential for this offense, especially with those two and their ability to extend plays and the difficulty that a defensive back is going to have in trying to plaster someone like Zay Flowers when Lamar Jackson's just scrambling around and running around and leaving the pocket and still looking downfield. So, you look at the overall numbers, Nestor, and I just looked it up. I mean, Lamar, I think, is 18th in the league in rushing yards. So, it's not as though he's not running at all. Is he running as much as he has in the past? Not quite as much. And, I look at him in terms of yards per attempt, which is a great gauge for quarterbacks throwing the football. As I've always said, this was never going to be that the Ravens suddenly became the Dolphins, who are throwing, who Lamar would have 200 passing attempts or 200 plus passing attempts through the first 6 games of the season. But, he's 10th in yards per attempt. He's 7.2 yards per throw. I mean, that's, it's not top of the league, but it's certainly not something that you point to and say, oh, that's been a major problem. It hasn't been. He's completed just under 70% of his passes. So there are a lot of statistics when you look at this offense where you say there's promise there. There's promise there. That's looked pretty good, but putting it all together, that's where I made a comment that it feels like they're springing a different leak every week. They get something cleaned up and then something else creeps up that you're concerned about. It was the drops 2 weeks ago. It was the red zone this week, and it was the between the tackles running game this week. So, they're just struggling to put it all together, right? And that really speaks to what you just said. There are things they do well, and statistically supports that, but it hasn't added up to, having this top 5 or even top 10 offense in terms of points scored right now. So they're chasing it. They're looking for it. I don't think the injuries have helped. I don't think it's helped that Odell Beckham has barely been on the field. I don't think it's helped that Bateman, as I've said, kind of looks lost to me. in terms of where he is in this offense.
What about the offensive line? We haven't talked about that. Where are
Yeah.
you on a year more of Zeitler, a year more of Moses when he's been in there? Stanley, we don't talk much about these guys, but
Yeah.
I don't feel like Lamar gets a clean pocket. I don't feel like they're running the hell out of the ball. I mean, Linderbaum was injured. He's back now. He made the fatal flaw 2 weeks ago as well.
Right.
I don't. And the left guard thing, we haven't talked much about it through 6 weeks, but the offensive line is where this whole thing begins. Lamar's capable. The wide receivers are capable. I think Mark Andrews is still capable, but I'm questioning Moses, Stanley, Beckham, Bateman, Andrews. I'm questioning their health as much as their ability and their age and whatever the tiredness of all of it would be. Because on paper, we looked at this back in May and June and July and said, oh my God, if they get this and if they get that. I mean, don't tell anybody, but Aguilar might be their best wide receiver. I mean, Flowers fine, but like just Aguilar's been better than I thought he was going to be and more involved than I thought he was going to be, probably because Bateman hasn't been out there and because Beckham's been a mystery, despite the fact that he's making more money than all of them combined.
Yeah, well, and even Aguilar dropped what should have been a beautiful touchdown from Lamar in Pittsburgh. A pass that hit him right in stride downfield. It went right through his hands.
Which is why he's on his fourth team or whatever it is at this point.
No question about it. But, you pose an interesting question about the offensive line. And this is where I am with this group. I think, first of all, you feel great about Tyler Linderbaum. I think he, going back to questions about positional value and whether you should draft a center in the first round. And look, all that's there, and that'll be answered in the coming years.
I didn't believe any of that, by the way, because I know how the organization really struggled after Matt Burke. And I would just say, just in a general sense, center's really important. You know what I mean? We talk about a catcher and Adley Rutschman handling the pitchers and all that. Having the right center here, having seen some of the wrong centers, the guy they got from Tampa 10 years ago for Flacco, that didn't work, and drafting the small guy from Delaware and Gradkowski and like all the other stuff. I was never, when they took the best center in the draft from Iowa, and I checked off on that immediately. I had no questions about that.
Fair enough. I'm not saying I don't like centers. I was going off of what a decade of activity from the organization had told you how they valued centers, which wasn't very highly. So, and everyone still has positional value. Justin Tucker's quite likely the greatest kicker in NFL history. That doesn't mean you should pay him $20 million a year. Everyone still has a cost relative to what their positional value is and what it means for winning a football game. So that's where that is. But point is, we're getting off track here talking about positional value.
Talking about positional value. They gave Odell Beckham all this money. That had nothing to do with positional value. That had to do with making their quarterback feel good. I mean, literally.
It has something to do with positional value. And but that was a unique circumstances. No question about that. Anyway, getting off track because you asked me about the offensive line. Tyler Linderbaum, feel really good about him. There's no question about that. I think Sam Mustipher did a nice job filling in for him for the couple games that Linderbaum was out, but you love having him back in there. He's on his way to being at least a Pro Bowl caliber kind of center. I don't think I'm going out on a limb saying that, and I think the numbers have supported that. He can still get better, no question about that, but you feel really good about him. I think Morgan Moses was playing well to start out the season. The shoulder, he missed his first game in 9 years. Really a credit to his durability. Came back, without having a chance to rewatch the game, as you and I are talking about this, just based off what we saw. How he played against Tennessee. I think he'll be fine. The fact that he only missed one game, the fact that he practiced fully by the end of the week in London, I would assume he's going to be okay. I think the interesting one for me has been Kevin Zeitler a little bit. Not that I think he's injured or anything like that, but I think he's rebounded here recently, but he got off to a little bit of a rough start. And you kind of wonder, he's at an age where you just start to say, okay, are these guys going to be the same player as they're a year older and they're on the wrong side of 30? So, are you getting, I'm not saying he's been bad per se, but has he been the same Kevin Zeitler who has been a fringe Pro Bowl type of right guard and had been for the Ravens the last 2 years? That's where I question it a little bit. Now, like I said, he's played better going back the last few weeks. So it's trended in the right direction for him. I think John Simpson's been everything you could reasonably expect. Is he a guy that's going to make the Pro Bowl? No, absolutely not. Has he been a killer for them or a liability? I don't really think so. I think he's been fine overall. The big question for me is Ronnie Stanley. I think he really struggled coming back playing against Pittsburgh, albeit a very difficult matchup. And I saw on at least one or two occasions against Tennessee. Not his best work. So I think I mean, he's 29. He's been through so much physically. There is that question, I think, at this point in time. One, just in his ability to stay on the field. But two, and this is the scarier one, I think, if he's hurt, if he's too injured to play, I mean, the Ravens have kind of been there, right? I mean, they've had to lean on Patrick McCary or Alejandro Villanueva or Orlando Brown moving from right tackle to left tackle. I mean, it's where they've been for going on 3 or 4 seasons now. It's just where they've been. But I think where it's a little more unsettling is if he's healthy enough to play and he's not dealing with an injury that's keeping him off the practice field or keeping him out on Sundays, what kind of player is he at this point in time? And that's where I just think it's, there's a little more question there. He's been through a heck of a lot physically, and I'm not blaming him for that. He had an awful ankle injury 3 years ago, back in 2020. How much does that take out of you as a player? And as he's approaching 30 years of age, is his durability, is his ability going to get better as he gets to 30 and he's on the wrong side of 30? Probably not. So
well, that's what I'm worried about with Stanley, Zeitler, and Moses. We like the veteran thing. I like it on paper. I don't know that I love it in December.
Yeah.
I don't know that I do.
And look, I want to be fair to that group. That offensive line played well last year. I mean, especially as the year went on, you got Stanley back in the mix. I mean, obviously Ben Powers was part of that group as well. That was an offensive line that was playing at a pretty high level. I mean, you're in a position where you had backup quarterbacks playing late in the season. There's always going to be a certain, how much of it's the quarterback, how much of it's on the O-line when you have someone back there who shouldn't be starting in the NFL starting games. We saw that with Malik Willis in the fourth quarter. It's not as though the Ravens pass rush got that much better in the fourth quarter than it was the first 3 quarters. It's him holding the ball and not being able to find open receivers and probably just not having the same command of the offense as Ryan Tannehill, and he got sacked 4 times as a result. So there are always so many different variables at work, but for this offense to continue to progress and get better and establish its identity over the long haul for the season, they need that group to play at a high level. I think, as I said, I think the pass protection for the most part has been, when it's been those guys on the field, and obviously some of those vets have missed some time. When they've been on the field, I think the pass protection has held up okay. It's been fine. Even if it hasn't been great all the time, I think it's been good enough. But, the run blocking in terms of just their schemed up running game, handing it to the backs, I think that's left a little bit to be desired. And let's be clear about this. I don't know how much of that also might be Gus Edwards. I'll be totally honest with you, Nestor. I'm not sure we're seeing the same explosive version of Gus Edwards who broke so many tackles. I see a guy that, yes, I'm not saying he's not physical at all, but is he making as many people miss? Is he running through as many tackles as he did in the past? And I think that's a fair question. I would say I don't know if he's doing that quite as much. So it just feels, and this goes for the entire offense, it feels like collectively it's just been a half a beat or a beat off from being what it really wants to be. And it's looked really good at times. We saw how it came alive in Cleveland against a Browns defense that, let's call it what it is. That's a really good Browns defense. If you see how they played all year and how they played against San Francisco on Sunday, statistically, that's an excellent defense. And we saw the Ravens just beat them up in the second quarter of that game. And, that's where they scored their points and they jumped out to their big lead. And I get it. Browns had a third string quarterback playing who had no business starting games, but, the Ravens couldn't control that. But their offense really moved the ball exceptionally well for, that second quarter against Cleveland. I mean, they moved it up and down the field and scored touchdowns on them. But those time periods have just been too fleeting. It's just been off, a pre-snap penalty or, a blown assignment, dropped passes against Pittsburgh, red zone woes against Tennessee. I mean, it's just, Lamar's great for 55 minutes like he was in Pittsburgh, and then he throws an awful interception in crunch time. It's just, they're just off just a little bit every week. But I think what's frustrating is it feels like it's something else is off every week. They fix something and then something else creeps up. And some of that is just, that's the nature of the NFL, right? Week to week, right? We hear that all the time. It's a week to week league. So you're always chasing perfection. You're rarely going to reach it. You're rarely going to find it. So that's kind of what they're dealing with. But yeah, the offense has to be better collectively. The entire body of work, it's been okay. It's been good at times, and then some other times it's been really, kind of weak. Look at their fourth quarter splits. They have not finished football games very effectively. Even some of these games where they've led, they haven't necessarily finished and been able to put teams away. And it's burned them a couple times. So it is a work in progress. That was a long answer to say it's a work in progress, and I think that really applies across the board in everything they're trying to do, and frankly, every position group. And I think, going back to, I mentioned Gus Edwards, that's why I'm intrigued to see if the Ravens work Keaton Mitchell into the mix here. He's an undrafted rookie. Let me be clear. I'm not saying he's going to carry the ball 20 times against the Lions, but
I like his
some
dad, if that
speed.
matters at all. Anthony Mitchell's one of the good dudes ever.
Hey, good pedigree. But I mean, this kid, we saw him in the preseason, and there's not a whole lot that I take away from preseason in terms of performance, and I certainly don't take anything away from statistics in the preseason, but traits. This kid has some serious speed, and I'd like to see what they can do, maybe getting him involved, seeing if you can get him to the edge, get him to the perimeter, and see if he can outrun some people. So I'd like to see them work him in gradually here over the next couple of weeks and see if he can give them a little extra juice, because that running game, they're missing the J.K. Dobbins home run potential. They are. Justice Hill's given them a little bit of that, certainly, but they're not getting a whole lot of that from Gus Edwards these days. And I think with an offensive line that hasn't been dominant run blocking, hasn't been dominant blowing people off the line of scrimmage, I think you're looking for that little more of a home run element there. So we're going to see what this looks like against the Lions team that's been really good defensively, and we'll see how this offense looks coming home, playing in their home building for the first time in quite a while.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find him out in Owings Mills all week long and anywhere the internet travels, Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all those good places. The Maryland Lottery is bringing our Maryland Crab Cake Tour back home and out onto the road throughout November, December. I'm putting dates together. I kind of held everything back because of the Orioles. Now that the Orioles have been eliminated, we have Ravens football this week against the Detroit Lions. Luke will be out in Owings Mills monitoring all that. I have things happening around here, including my 55th birthday. Luke joined us, as well as George Schulen, my old science teacher. Actually, he was never my science teacher because he taught science that I still don't understand. We went through photosynthesis and all the periodic table of elements and all that stuff. Also, Chuck Jacobs talked some old fashions with my son. My son, first time on the radio in 20 years. He's like, I've been on since then. I'm like, no, you haven't. You don't call in anymore like you used to. So my kid actually came by and had an old-fashioned at Drug City on Friday. So you'll hear all that this week. Great guests they had. We're booking the governor on now. We're getting around the state. Could be down in Annapolis next month as well. We'll be back at Pappas in Hunt Valley. We're going to get back to Coco's for the holidays as well. Getting up on Thanksgiving. God, we're a couple weeks out on Thanksgiving. It's crazy. Detroit Lions coming to town. It always makes me think about Thanksgiving. I just hope we're not the lunch in this particular case, or the dinner in this case. Luke will be out there all week. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore positive.